And that's really what responsibility is about empowerment. Because if I can't take responsibility for something, I can't be empowered around it. But the moment that I do take responsibility for it, it means I am empowered around it and I have a choice that I can make around it. And so I think when people finally get that with money and they go, whoa, I'm empowered here, they go, I can also be empowered with my health in a different way. I can be empowered with my education in a different way. I can be empowered with my nutrition in a different way. And that becomes this self-fulfilling thing where you realize like, oh, like this is this huge thing in my life that I was missing. And then I think one of the most important pieces of that is finally you go, maybe there is something important about this reality. Maybe me loving myself and my family and connecting to this higher purpose and responsibility of what does it mean that we could change the future together by taking responsibility rather than telling the state to do it. And I think that's sort of the coalescing that we're watching of all Bitcoiners is realizing like we can actually take responsibility for the future that all of humanity is going to inherit, but that's only once we've made the decision that we actually will be responsible for it as opposed to relegating it outside of us.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming by for another episode of the Ben Wehrman podcast. I appreciate you being here. Today, we have Erik Cason, who is an excellent Bitcoiner in the space. He pumps out so much great content. He's an author, a writer. He goes on all sorts of podcasts. He's pumping out all sorts of great rants on Nostr, and we're very happy to have him here today to talk about Bitcoin and crypto sovereignty. Erik, thank you so much for being here, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I've been enjoying following you on Nostr mostly, and I'm happy that that's been sticky for you. I've been talking to other people that have been like, I don't know about Nostr, and I'm like, well, just wait until you get kicked off other platforms, and then you'll kind of understand its value.
Or until they feel like they want to get paid for sharing content.
Yeah, like that's kind of the more surprising one is like, hey, like you could actually get paid 10 times more streaming your music here than on, competing services. But, you do you. If you like getting screwed, feel free.
And one of the things I've been telling people recently is, as I was just sharing with you before we started recording, I am right now living in Costa Rica, right down the street from all sorts of different shops and markets that accept Bitcoin for things. So I have literally been buying my beef for dinner with the Bitcoin I've earned on Nostr. Like I have, enough zaps on there where I can continue buying meat, and it's not quite sustainable yet. The zaps are still small, but I had a decent savings from posting my butt off for the last 2 years. So I have a little bit of Bitcoin to spend. I haven't tapped into my Fiat balance yet. So, I mean, this is the dream life, I think. Just creators being able to just create content on there, speak their mind, get value for value rewarded, and be able to just live their life that way. I think that it should be a valuable path or a tenable path for people, don't you?
Absolutely. Like, I think it's funny because I've had this conversation a number of times where like there's a lot of people will look at market dynamics and sort of look backwards and being like, well, you gotta appeal to the masses. Like, how are we going to recruit everybody to Nostr? And it's like, no, like there's a totally different model that like we're growing Nostr for people that are uninterested in that model and people that do want the self-ownership of what does it mean I really own my own content. And like, I personally find it's a little crazy, like as content producers, that people are still willing to go into these centralized services where you can get canceled at any point in time. And I don't know, like it seems kind of wild to me that there isn't a greater thought process that's like, well, if I can get canceled, there's an opportunity that I will be canceled. And if I can be canceled and this is where I make all my money, should I even open myself up to this possibility? And the one that really breaks my heart is people that make really great high quality YouTube content. And then they find they just get banned. You don't have access to any of that content. And like now it's like a real problem for you. And I would have hoped after the TikTok ban that people would really sort of get what was happening. But in all honesty, like I think we just need to kind of go through these cycles for a while longer. And, there'll be another event on Twitter. There'll be something on Instagram or Facebook, wherever. And each cycle will sort of cause for more people to come here. Maybe 10% stick. And over time, that'll start to build greater audiences. The one I'm really waiting for is just really talented artists to use Nostr and be like, hey, this is my one platform because I own everything. You get exclusive content here. You should come here because like, you can zap me directly. I really appreciate it. And yeah, for me, that's kind of the bigger deal is like, I want to have a sincere peer-to-peer relationship with the people whose art and posts and content I really like. And so I think it's really important and great to see that it's being developed. And I think there's a lot of there's a real lack of appreciation of just how young this still is. And so it's like, look, if we were like 15 years in, maybe I could see why you thought traction wasn't so good, but like we're only a couple years in. So like, let's have a little bit of patience and see where we can go.
Yeah, and like you mentioned there, the incentives are so clear for these people with big audiences on decentralized platforms to just move over there. It takes like, 10 minutes to create an account and just make a post on your Instagram or Twitter or whatever and say, hey, this is what Nostr is. It's pretty cool. You should come check it out and follow me. They instantly get a new income stream from their audience that loves them and wants to support them. And this is one of the cool experiments we've seen in real time is, are people actually going to Zap? Like, who would actually give away their Bitcoin when they could just consume this content for free? And what we've seen is people love zapping each other and sending value back when they receive value. And it's been very much a white pill moment for humanity of just seeing like, wow, people like actually really want to support these artists and these creators. We just have to bring them over and just show them the bridge onto it, because there are basically still zero real A-list like influential voices on there. I would say Jack Dorsey is really the only one. Edward Snowden came on and posted a few times, but he hasn't been on there in like a year. It's like no big celebrities or any voices that will really pull people over yet. So it's still a total infancy right now.
Yeah, like I'm surprised that more people haven't like essentially used the centralized services as a feed. Be like, hey, I'm going to put spicier content out there that would probably get me banned here. So like, come to Nostr and check out what I have to say. But also, it's just like long term, like people are going to want to own their own data, and as we get more tools, more infrastructure, easier ways to use these things, like the value add is going to become so clear over time that people are just going to make that choice. And even if not, like I'm loving it. I'm not going anywhere. And like one of my favorite things is like bringing up my X fee and bringing up my Nostr fee and like doom scroll and be rage baited for like 10 minutes. And then I go, oh, I close it. And then I go to Nostr. I'm like, oh, like, yeah, like stuff's like normal. Like I'm just totally being rage baited this whole time. And for me, that's such a dramatic unveiling of like how much we're actually getting totally tooled by the algorithms in ways that I think are really dangerous. You know, like I still lurk on X a lot. I stopped posting, I don't know, like 6 or 9 months ago, just because like I found I was getting too involved in rage baiting. I'm planning on coming back at some point in time, just because I'm doing a new startup and there'll be necessities to reach out more through that platform. But yeah, like that's the other one that I think is the most important to people is like have an opportunity to see what it look like when you have an algorithm that's not explicitly trying to control you and bait you into certain ways. And that's what Nostr offers. And I think it's a really powerful perspective to have.
100%. Super excited to see what the coming years bring. And it, like you said, it's still kind of just coming in spurts right now, adoption spurts, when there's certain geopolitical or big tech social media events that happen where people say, screw this, I'm going to look for something else. And enough people have planted seeds at that point for them to go check Nostr out. But, I do see every single time we have one of those spurts, more and more people are sticking, and it's just slowly gathering momentum. And in sort of the same way that Bitcoin is, people are just going to come when they feel like they have to. And
For sure. And like, this is what
pain in the status quo to need an alternative. And they just don't really need it yet for the most part, but they will.
Yeah, and like that's what I've witnessed through Bitcoin. Like I remember in 2013 when Cyprus implemented capital controls, like there was like a big spike in the price of Bitcoin. And everyone was really excited, and there was sincere people that were fleeing from capital controls in Cyprus using Bitcoin. But like we have events that happen like that over and over and again, and that's the same thing that'll happen with Nostr. And the same thing like I just find there's like a real lack of appreciation of like, this is all already going so breakneck fast across the board. And if we're seeing what the real adoption curve is, it's like pretty crazy. So I really think it's just like have patience. Like the same thing, like Bitcoin's not going to fail. Nostr's not going to fail. This is one of the great things about these models is that like it doesn't, like these aren't highly financed models and businesses that can go into failure modes. And so like I think that's a really important thing to remember. And also because it's all open source, like anybody can pick it up and put it down whenever they want. And that's really important. And so very similar to Bitcoin, I expect us to continue to have these growth cycles. And I also think like these are just sort of the prototypes and the preliminary forms of what will eventually become sort of a new political structure in terms of a capital T, capital P. And like, it's already obvious to me that both Bitcoin and Nostr are part of this same cypherpunk ethos, that like these are tools that all of humanity needs. And it's not necessarily about Americans need them or Europeans or South Africans, but like all peoples everywhere will always need access to encryption technologies, the ability to have peer-to-peer contact with each other and make peer-to-peer exchanges on their own subjectivity. And there's like never going to be a time in humanity where that isn't necessary. And so for me, that value add is so important that it truly is the most political thing that exists today. And that's why it's going to win, is that there's nothing else that offers that in the same way.
Yeah, 100%. And in the sense how you say, like, it's the most political thing, I think that's sort of a different way of what I usually say, which is the most important vote that you have is not red team or blue team, but what kind of money you choose to put your savings in, which I believe is Bitcoin. Would you agree with me on that? And how would you elaborate on that concept?
Absolutely. And I'd say it's more than just a vote. Like it's a choice to make sure that the vote can no longer disenfranchise you. And like it's truly terrifying to me that like we have a political system where like if we get a plurality of people that decide they want to disenfranchise another part of the population, that's like part of it. And it's like I find it really insulting on a number of levels that like you have there are individuals that have a sincere belief that like they can steal my property, which are firearms, because they don't like what other people have made a choice to do that with. And like, to me, that's like such a grotesque violation that the truth is like, there isn't a whole lot that I can actually do about that other than object. But once I have my Bitcoin and I have that stored securely and correctly, like, it doesn't matter what anybody votes. They can't take it from me. And even more importantly, is if that's secured correctly, I can go to the other side of the planet where there are, jurisdictions that are welcoming and happy to have me there, and I can recover my Bitcoin and I can proceed to use it. And so it's such a radically important thing because it removes us from this collectivist form of politics that to me, like, it's not even any real form of politics anymore. It's this extremely narrow window that has become part of this structure that most people can't see in any meaningful way. And that's one of the things why I refer to Bitcoin as the political, like capital T, capital P, because like it introduces a new form of politics that destroys this old order. And so like I very much sincerely believe that if we had just 10% of Americans today owning Bitcoin and actively using that as their storage of value, we would actually see the collapse of the dollar. We would see a radical new opportunity for whether it's local jurisdictions, states, or new forms of collectives to come about. And I do believe that that's ultimately the destiny of the future, because like if you look at what the dollar is doing and where it's going, like we're at the end of the Bretton Woods system. And the only question is how is it going to be replaced and how much are people going to suffer through that replacement?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree. These are the most important questions to be talking about, which is why it's a persistent theme of the podcast of just talking about, what is this transition going to look like and how do we ensure that ourselves and our loved ones and as many people as we can possibly get out to go through this transition process and come out the other side even better. And it's going to take all of us really putting our brains together because it's going to be a huge challenge given the state of things where we're at right now. 37 trillion in debt, wars going on everywhere. Like things are just rough right now. And it's going to take all of us putting our minds together to figure out a good way through this. And I'd love to continue getting even deeper into that. I have a bunch of notes for cool things we're going to talk about. But before we do, I would love to just hear some of your story. This is something I always try to include for new episodes with Bitcoiners. I know that everyone has a good Bitcoin story, how they got into it. So I'd love to hear yours. When did your Bitcoin journey start and how did it bring you to where you are today?
It really started kind of at Occupy Wall Street in, I guess this was probably 2012. So Occupy Wall Street had been going on for a while. Occupy Oakland was a thing. I was participating in it. I identified as like a far left socialist at the time. I really believed like, rah, rah, we're going to go change the world. We just got to elect the right people and do the right thing and it'll happen. As I watched the movement sort of fall apart and stumble all over itself, I had a masked anarchist at one point in time be like, hey, like this Bitcoin thing is really important. You should like look into it. Like this is how we end Wall Street owning everything. And I was like, yeah, like whatever. So Occupy Wall Street failed. I was kicked out of university because of like my involvement with that and the things that I did. And I went into like a really deep depression after that. And in that, I remembered this conversation with a guy, started reading about Bitcoin. There's definitely gears turning. And then when I heard about some guys that were doing some smuggling, getting stuff in and out of China using Bitcoin, that's kind of when it first really clicked. And I was like, oh, there's like something really important here. So as I slowly clawed my way out of depression through like learning more about Bitcoin, it became more and more important to me. And like I was pretty obsessed with it. And there wasn't any information at the time. It was really just the Bitcoin talk forums. And so Coinbase had recently started as a company. I was aware in there in San Francisco. It was just like Brian and Fred at the time. So I was like harassing them to like give me a job, and they're like, no, like go away. Like you don't have what we need. They hired a few more people, and then eventually they're like, oh, we have a need for a support manager. Like maybe you're fit for this. Didn't get that job either. But then at the end of, I guess the end of Q3 in 2013, Olaf, the first employee at Coinbase, he reached out to me and he was like, hey, we need bodies. You want on board? And I was like, fuck yeah. And so then that was really kind of my bachelor's degree in Bitcoin, if you will, working at Coinbase from 2013 to 2017, just kind of dealing with that disaster. And then during the block size wars, it was like really contentious inside. There was a lot of disagreements. And I was really surprised to find that I was sort of on this side with people that didn't want big blocks, and that everybody in the company, not everybody, but a lot of people wanted big blocks, and that they weren't really getting the argument. So once that was clear that there was going to be a hard fork, like I put in my resignation right then, because I was like, I'm not going to fucking deal with a fork doing this bullshit, because like I just knew it was going to be a nightmare on the inside. And lo and behold, later on, I had a bunch of lawyers reach out to me being like, were you at Coinbase during this? And I was like, no, because I knew this shit was going to come up, so leave me alone. And at this point, I had met my current co-founder, Jesse, and we immediately connected really deeply on Bitcoin and philosophy. And he had really encouraged me. He was like, I think a lot of your thoughts are really important, and that you've made some really important and interesting links between philosophy and Bitcoin, and you should start publishing those writings. So really between 2017 to 2020, I put a lot of those writings out there, and it's sort of accumulated enough into a place where a lot of people encouraged me to make that into a book. And so I did like a year stint at Unchained, met a lot more people. For me, that was part of my recovery arc from like working at the shitcoin casino that is Coinbase. Love the guys at Unchained, great product and great people. And then after that, I was like, yeah, it's time to publish a book. Published it and just kind of started doing all the podcasts and stuff. And in all honesty, my hope was always to find other people that were really interested in sort of the deeper philosophical implications of Bitcoin cryptography and like a decentralized internet. But I was kind of surprised to find that like there weren't a ton of people that had really thought about it very deeply. And so I'm still sort of on that journey to find other people, but I can say confidently today that like the first 4 years in my Bitcoin journey, I didn't meet really anybody that cared about that. And in the last 4 years of my Bitcoin journey, I've met literally hundreds, if not thousands of people that's kind of their primary thing. So it's pretty incredible to see and feel the progress from like where we were at. Cause I can say like my first 4 years in Bitcoin were extraordinarily lonely, because like I didn't know if I was crazy or if the world was crazy. And like now I know that like the world was definitely crazy, and more and more people are coming on board and really actually getting what Bitcoin offers, not beyond just protecting your savings and wealth, but the real opportunity of what it means that there are now people in places like Costa Rica who probably couldn't get good bank accounts or savings that can now actually access Bitcoin directly. And when you go down and like zap your local rancher, like that's a true peer-to-peer interaction. There's nobody in between you two. And to me, that has such profound ramifications for how it transforms the global financial landscape that like it cannot be denied. So.
Yeah, 100%. You can see it just changing how people function all over the place. And I know that this is one of the things that you talk about a lot in your work, is how Bitcoin changes people. And you and I both are individual examples. I love your example of how you were, really in a state of depression, and just falling into this rabbit hole helped pull you out of that. And I think that a big part of that, in my opinion, I'd be curious of your thoughts on this, is specifically for men. Like, men need to have a greater purpose to pursue in order to really feel fulfilled and happy and like continue ascending in our lives, even more than
Yeah.
women do. And for you, like, I mean, Bitcoin is perfect for that because it pulls you through this journey of knowledge and history and economics and all these important world topics. It teaches you things. It teaches you things you were lied to about, which gives you a little bit of inner fire to fight back and create a better world. Like, would you say that this is like especially something that like everyone needs to go learn about just for the sake of their own mental well-being?
Oh, absolutely. Like the sort of narrative and story arc that you get to go through, kind of going on your own intellectual hero's journey of discovering what do you really think, what are really your opinions. Like one of the troubling things I had to deal with was in sort of trying to overcome modern monetary theory and understand Austrian economics. Like I really had to understand like there's a lot of really feel good ideas that I have that just don't actually operate on any economic principle. And like, why did I feel bad about that? And like the continual process of uncovering towards that. But also, I think the bigger one for me was really, I felt so nihilistic when I had first discovered Bitcoin that the true possibility of there being something I could save for myself, of there being an answer for us to go beyond the sort of systematic exploitation we all have to face, felt really impossible. And as I dug deeper and deeper into Bitcoin, there was almost this question of like, is this really possible? Like, could this truly be the thing that it's promising? Like, at what point am I going to get rugged in this narrative? And as I dug deeper and deeper and deeper, I found each successive question took me deeper on that intellectual journey until I finally found myself like in the belly of the beast at the deepest one of like, is it possible for me to change my life and my circumstances because of what Bitcoin is? And for me, that's kind of when I had my own transcendental awakening where I was like, you know what, like, and I had an interesting conversation with my ex-partner about this, I really communicated all of my own uncertainty and fear and doubt about it. And she was like, look, she was like, I can't tell you what you have to do in any of this. She was like, I can tell you if you don't pursue this and it does the stuff you work, like you'll regret it with all of your being. She was like, if you do pursue it and it doesn't work out, like you shot for it, it failed, and you like know that and you can put it away. And so with that, I was like, all right, let's do it. And that was really the decision that changed my life, because this is when I really decided, like, I'm going to go all in on Bitcoin. I know everybody thinks that this is crazy. And you know, like when my mom found out I was doing this, she like pulled me aside. She's like, I'm really concerned about you. I think this is a really terrible idea. Like, you're never going to get this money back. It's all going to go to zero. And I was like, you are wrong. And it turns out that I was right. And it's pretty shocking to me how many times that conversation came up for me over the last decade. Like, even when I'd been working at Coinbase for a few years, a really great friend from college who very successful, intelligent individual, you know, graduated top tier Ivy League schools. You know, he came to me in same conversation. He was like, look, man, he was like, and this is why we're not friends anymore, is like in that conversation, he was like, look, he was like, I'm going to be blunt with you. He's like, I'm smarter than you, Erik. Like, I know how this works. Like sell out now, put it all in the stock market. Like, you'll get your 8% gains and like, you should be happy with that. And I was like, look, I was like, I know what you believe you know, and I'm telling you right now, like, you're wrong. You're totally wrong. And when you look at the price of Bitcoin and it's at $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 down the line, you're going to go, God damn it, Erik was right. And it was like, that'll never happen. And I was like, all right, man, well, like, you do you. I hope it works. You know, and while we haven't talked since then, I hope that that's a truism that if we do encounter each other, he'd be gracious enough to apologize. And don't expect that. But that was also a really valuable lesson for me in all of this, because I didn't have strong beliefs for myself or about myself before Bitcoin. And with each kind of successive round of this, it's really reinforced for me that I do know what I'm talking about in my own beliefs here, and that it's really easy for us to get contorted into other people's belief systems. Well, you know, and it's not just Bitcoin, it's kind of across the board. And because of my exposure to Bitcoin, though, like I've really defined myself as an iconoclast that doesn't fit well into kind of any box. And so, like, trying to talk with politics, like, people find me a weird amalga because, like, like I have a lot of socially liberal values in particular ways, but also, like, I have some very conservative values. A lot of people can't make sense of how these things work. And that's all just because to me, like, I don't have a loyalty to a group or an ideology, but it's really to like what my truth is and the pursuit of that for me and what's the best for my life. And I think Bitcoin teaches us that because, well, it's different today, but for a long time, there weren't very strong advocates, particularly on the financial and economic side. And it was difficult to really be able to look at everything and determine for yourself and go, you know what? I know other people say it's wrong, but I've done my work, and what I really understand about this, it shows that it's a much better storage of value and form of money than anything else that's been offered. So I'm going to make my choice and go with that.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that Bitcoiners really can come together on. And when you go to any meetup or conference with other Bitcoiners, is you can very quickly find that you are eye to eye on this, which is we've all had those experiences of our friends and family sitting us down and just saying, we're so concerned about you. You're just obsessed with this orange coin and we don't know what to do. Or any of the other tangential rabbit holes that Bitcoin will inevitably take you through, diet, food, politics, war, like all these different things that Bitcoin rewires your brain on once you have that fundamental understanding of how fiat money works and how it corrupts everything. Personally, I cannot keep my mouth shut about anything. So I'm always just spewing like shotgun everywhere I go. And I've definitely lost friendships over this. And that's just the price that we pay. But when I go and find some Bitcoiners, it's just, I feel so warm and fuzzy inside because I know that these people have done that same first principles research. They put into proof of work themselves, and they've tanked through the friends and family calling them crazy also. And this is why it's just so fun to be around these people, and why I'm so excited for just these communities continuing to flourish around Bitcoin, not just, all about Bitcoin itself, but eventually like things that branch out from that. Like a lot of people talking about homesteading and people getting more into like creating really good food and creating citadel communities, like Bitcoiner communities that care about other things, but they have that foundation of Bitcoin that they've all been through together. And they know that this will be the foundational building block to create that future they want, no matter which direction it may go.
Well, and it's funny because, like we say, it's Bitcoin, but it's really about like recovering from like the fiat nihilism virus and going into like a low time preference worldview that happens to also be one that tends to like unify all of these things. And so Bitcoin just becomes this really great qualifier. And it's really powerful and amazing because I can see repeatedly how that form of knowledge and understanding really shifts things. And like one of the more interesting ones is that because like I'm working out of here in San Francisco at the Presidio, at a Bitcoin Presidio, and there's like a lot of prominent Bitcoiners here, but they're very much on the technical side. And I find it funny that there's this interesting divergence between sort of the technical Bitcoiners and the social Bitcoiners. And like the social Bitcoiners are the ones that really acknowledge kind of all of these fields that we've talked about, whereas the technical guys can kind of keep themselves tucked more tightly and reserved kind of away from the greater social community. And I think part of the product is that like having these sort of greater dialogues, it's almost like taboo for them because like now you start dealing with a much greater social ideology of like, and I think part of this is for their own like protection, like unintentionally, sort of unconsciously, is that like if they start dealing with a lot of these greater questions of that, like Bitcoin is a profound political vehicle, like that sort of imparts a very real existentialism that I think some of them with the technical work that they're doing, they would almost be like, whoa, like this is too big for me. So it's just really interesting being in the office in that like I find, I don't want to say it's avoidant, but there's almost like a sheepishness of the sort of bluntness that I bring to conversations. Because like one thing that I try to hit people with is I'm like, why Bitcoin? Like you're clearly brilliant. Like you could be across the way working with the Web3 guys on some shitcoin project and you're not. Like why? And it's kind of interesting because they like stumble and fumble with it a lot. And eventually they're like, well, like, it's like really important. And it's like, well, yeah, but why? Like shitcoin could be important. And they're like, well, no, it couldn't. And like, it's kind of interesting because like they've never really had the opportunity to like socially reason through why Bitcoin is so important as much as like sort of the technical details of it. And it's pretty beautiful too, because a lot of times at the end there feels like a much stronger solidarity amongst us where I'm like, okay, cool. Like I get that like you're totally down for the cause. You just don't speak about it because like that's not really what you do.
I love that phrase you threw out there, the escaping fiat nihilism. I think that's such a great topic that we can always talk about. And I brought that up with my second episode with Brandon Quinn, and we talked about this, how this incoming generation, the Gen Z and Gen Alpha, we're seeing it all. I mean, we already saw this some in the millennials as well, but it's even worse for Gen Z, is these people are just sort of being born into this state of existential dread. Like it seems like everything's going wrong everywhere. There's no opportunity for them to rise in the world. Climate change is going to come kill them. Like there's viruses everywhere. There's no economic opportunity, blah, 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 blah. So what would be your answer on why the people of fiat world are so nihilistic? And is this an intentional psychological operation by the powers that be who quite like the population to be in a physically, mentally, and spiritually suppressed state?
That's a hard one to answer because like on some level there is an intentionality about it, but it's also like that intentionality is created from the misaligned incentives. And so like I'm a big fan of that. Like essentially what happened at the beginning of the 20th century was like the start of I like to call it an inverted eugenics project, because like it's about, you need to have these highly controlled populations, and as you sort of narrowed the scope more and more, I forget where I read it, but there was like a really great quote that was something to the effect of that, like in 1920, like most Americans had never met anyone who had worked for the government. Like that was just something that didn't happen. And it was because there wasn't a fiat money to support the federal government. Like the federal government just had to be magnitude smaller. But then between World War I and World War II, which to me, like World War I was the initiation of the end of law, and the end of World War II was like the complete destruction of law entirely. Because like you get into this logical problem of like where like, so the law is the thing that's supposed to protect us. But then when nation states go at each other and make war, and they mechanize that war and they escalate that war in such a way that like they make essentially these gigantic killing machines, like how do we justify the existence of that thing? And like that was a question that never got answered. And then we just went into full bore statism. We went into the Cold War where it was like, well, we're in this perpetual war economy forever. And within that, it was like, we have these populations we have to control, like, let's vaccinate all of them to the greatest degree. And like, you know, I think part of that was to implement a project, not only of eugenics, of actually intentionally harming people, but like, I also think like it was part of a much wider experiment of like, hey, we're just going to open up the entire population to perform various medical experiments on them to see where these things go. And like, I don't think that that was all part of a hugely harmful thing. I think a lot of people thought it was really positive, in the same way that a lot of people have that same positive view of like, everybody should get vaccinated today. Why would you ever doubt the science? Like, it's very clear that that science helps. And it's like, well, like what I'm calling science and what you call science are like different things. And like, it's very problematic if we don't have a root of like what the quote science means. But then that's been just a long chain of interactions that like the incentives have gotten increasingly misincentivized. And it's also had us arrive at like intergenerational problems of where like, you know, like my grandfather fought in World War II. He was highly traumatized by it, as most men, because like this wasn't like classic ancient war in any way. Like it was just like route fucking murdering. And so like he was deeply traumatized because he had to like stab several Japanese men to death that tried to come into his camp at night. And he was just, the thing that traumatized him so much is he was just always like, I don't know these people. Like we never had an encounter with each other, and I just had to fucking kill them. And furthermore, like it wasn't like we were meeting in the battleground across from each other, like as men in ancient war, but like I just had to like fucking stab these dudes in the back when they came into my tent. And so like I think all of these things align to designed for this totally nihilistic society where like now when a kid's born, it's like you've inherited several generations of trauma, you've inherited several generations of that nihilism. There's like a very strong and powerful dialogue of it's like this really kind of fucked up individualism, because like it's an individualism that's defined about you being homogenized in society and like fitting in that as like a single good little citizen unit. And so I think it's like it's all really, really alarming and troubling and difficult for most people. And so for me, if I'm trying to like get somebody out of that, like I'm very much in line with Morpheus of that, like most people should never be unplugged. Like it's fucking dangerous for them and it's dangerous for you. And if you do unplug them, like though they will like flip the fuck out. And so like most people should stay in this system, and it would be dangerous to try to liberate them from it. And it doesn't mean that that isn't a goal, but it's the same way as like if I want to save all the cows and I tear down all the fences and I'm like, go be free, cows, like most of them will die. With that being said, like I'm really interested in the small groups of people that can actually handle liberation. And so for me, like this is one of the reasons I love psychedelics so much, because like that does open a doorway to a radical new perception of what reality is and its possibilities. And it also contains the possibility of like a true transcendental awakening of understanding like there is something much greater and bigger here, and we can find that, but it's also something that like it's only through our own empowered agency that that discovery can be made. And I think a lot of people who seek that should be entitled to it, but like it has to be really self-compelled. Like it's not me just shoving acid down the throat of my uncle who wants to watch sports all day. Like that's going to end bad for everybody.
Yeah, true. One of the words that you throw out there, two of the words rather, are collectivism and individualism. And I circled these because I know you've done podcasts with Robert Breedlove in the past, and I'm remembering back on my episode I did with him a while back, was his basic concept that we're not really in a Republican versus Democrat political debate right now. It's more so collectivism versus individualism is really the bigger political battle going on, where we're deciding how we're going to live our lives and build the future. Would you agree with this, and how would you elaborate on that?
I would agree with it, and my elaboration on it would be like it's whether or not any forms of individualism do exist. And like I think like to me democracy is just like it's a false collectivized version of individuality. And like that's one of the things I adore about both Bitcoin and cryptography is like I'm not asking for permission around my individuality here. Like I am imposing that into the world. And I think that's sadly one of the things that a lot of people really don't understand about our form of government is that like the Constitution isn't a document that makes and defines what our government is. It's a document that's designed to inherently restrict and wall off certain segments of life from never to being a sacrosanct to any government intervention. And like that's been long lost from a long time ago. And so like I think we're in such a highly collectivist mode of thinking at this point in time that like that like is the eugenics project itself. And like I think in the same way, like if I could pluck up a population of you know, like a Germanic tribe from the 17th century and like plop them down in America, there would be a lot of stuff that they would be like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, get the fuck away from me. Like you don't get to tell me how I raise my animals, how I slaughter them, what I do sell, what I don't sell. Why do I need a permit to cut somebody's hair? Like, this seems insane. And to me, like, that's sort of the forms of disciplinary indoctrination that we've had, is that a lot of people believe that they're like the education system, for example, like people sincerely believe like if you don't send your kids to school, that's an abusive thing, and they'll fall behind. And it's like, what do any of these things even mean? Like fall behind what? You know? And I think that it's really important because like these are all the forms of collectivism that are these really powerful ways to control people, to where like they can't even see that like You don't have to send your kids to school. You don't have to vaccinate them. Like, you don't have to register them for birth. Like, turns out that like life itself is actually a process that happens without the medical establishment. Like, fucking crazy. And like, my ex-partner was really into the idea of free birthing, which is kind of like a step beyond just like a home birth, but it's where like you just like have the kid by yourself, no medical people at all. Like, even your partner is going to stand outside the door, and it's just like you in a dark cave, like having a baby, just like other animals would. And like most people find that so radical and so threatening and so like diabolical that like most people freak out about it. And they're like, how could you do that? Like, it's dangerous for her, it's dangerous for the baby. And it's like, motherfucker, like this is the way that they control you, is that they have made you into such a cucked pussy little bitch that the moment that any form of danger comes up, you're like, oh God, like Jesus, we're all gonna die. And it's like, that's what life is. And like, that's why a woman giving birth to life was such a sacred thing, is like, there is something fucking at stake in it, and it's our own life. And it's the very real danger of what it means to live and to produce life and to participate that as a meaningful actor. And like, through the medicalization, not only of birth, but of health itself, there's very little capacity for self-empowerment and agency against that. And that's like, I want to be clear, like, that's because it is so easy and it is really comfortable. And we have been conditioned to have permanent safety around us at all times. But the truth of reality is that none of that's actually real. That's all part of a false perspective that's been given through replacing God with the state. And so long as you believe that the state is this magical God that's going to make you safe and healthy and care for you and give you love, we're going to continue to have this, frankly, like this sort of nihilistic nightmare. And it's because people sincerely believe that the state is God. And it's only once that perspective has been defeated that like a new form of life is produced.
Yeah, and I love that framework that having responsibility and some risk around decisions and actions and certain things in life is a good thing that helps really sharpen people and make people stronger. And I'll bring back another former guest I had on that I know you've also connected with, is Alex Svetsky. He's done a lot of work writing about how Bitcoin is responsibility go up technology, how Bitcoin is sort of a forcing function for responsibility, not only on the governments and the bankers and all these people who will suddenly not be able to print fiat anymore, and they'll be forced into being responsible, and who knows how that could cause to a cascade of effects where it could be their demise. What are your thoughts on this concept of Bitcoin being a responsibility forcing function, and how will that change the current landscape we're looking at in the world today?
Yeah, I think that the greatest part is that it makes us realize that like giving responsibility of like the actual economic means to life itself to the government has not only been dangerous and horrifying, but like it's like advanced this machinery of war, like unequivocally greater and faster and beyond any means that any humans have had access to before. I mean, like if you look at like a good example is like if you look at the Armenian genocide that was carried out at the end of the Ottoman Empire, like that was the most effective genocide that had been carried out at that point in time. And that even pales in comparison to the forms of technology that we can use to murder people. Just look at how efficient the Khmer Rouge was at fucking murdering a quarter of the population of Cambodia. Like the state is this really, really dangerous apparatus. And the only reason it's so dangerous is because the way that we've relegated the totality of responsibility to life into them, and that we're like, hey, you can actually have responsibility over life and death of individuals because you are the state. And like, that's been such an insane and dangerous thing. But like, we have this across life everywhere. Like, education is the place that I find it the most alarming. Like, both of my kids are homeschooled. I'm really proud of how they do. Like my son, he does math at, he's under 10. He does math at, like a 10th grade level. He reads at like a 10th grade level, despite the fact that, he's several times under that. And I still have people coming to me being like, oh, he's going to fall behind. Like, how is he going to know anything? And I'm like, why do you think that him sitting in a chair in front of somebody who frankly is probably dumber than him for most of his day, and being forced to believe that this person has information that he needs is like a healthy perspective. And I never get good answers for that, but like we see this across the board. And so everywhere where we've relegated responsibility away from us, because also like this is saying like, hey, I don't actually need to raise my kids. I can send them to a strange pink-haired lady out, in our community who's going to teach him stuff like he should hate himself because he's white. And that means that he was part of an oppressive structure that created slavery. Like, is that really a value that I have? And is it responsible for me to relegate that somewhere else outside of me? And so I think Bitcoin sort of helps return a lot of these ideas to us, because we start to think about like, okay, like why am I sending my kid to this institution that's teaching him that like me owning Bitcoin makes me an evil far-right fascist that wants to set fire to the world and doesn't care about the environment? And is any of that true? No. But that is part of the process of what happens when we relegate responsibility outside of us, is that we give responsibility to people who may not have our best interests at heart. And that's a lot of the story of our society today. And I think that's part of why people find Bitcoin so empowering, because reclaiming that responsibility in a way that nobody can take from you is deeply empowering. And that's really what responsibility is about empowerment. Because if I can't take responsibility for something, I can't be empowered around it. But the moment that I do take responsibility for it, it means I am empowered around it, and I have a choice that I can make around it. And so I think when people finally get that with money and they go, whoa, I'm empowered here, they go, I can also be empowered with my health in a different way. I can be empowered with my education in a different way. I can be empowered with my nutrition in a different way. And that becomes this self-fulfilling thing where you realize like, oh, like this is this huge thing in my life that I was missing. And then I think one of the most important pieces of that is finally you go, maybe there is something important about this reality. Maybe me loving myself and my family and connecting to this higher purpose and responsibility of what does it mean that we could change the future together by taking responsibility rather than telling the state to do it. And I think that's sort of the coalescing that we're watching of all Bitcoiners, is realizing like, we can actually take responsibility for the future that all of humanity is going to inherit, but that's only once we've made the decision that we actually will be responsible for it, as opposed to relegating it outside of us.
Yeah, and taking on the negatives of that too, of the risk of, just something as simple as doing a Bitcoin transaction wrong, you lose your Bitcoin. And there's no customer service department for Bitcoin like there is for the bank. And that's like the first step of, you're on your own now, kid. Like, go figure it out. Don't make mistakes. Be careful when you do things. And, there isn't always going to be a backup plan. I think that is sort of bringing this, tribal feeling we all have in ourselves of just having some risk in our lives again. Because like you said, the state has really created this environment where it feels like there's always a backup plan. There's always a daddy there to save you, when really they're not there to save you. They're there to like siphon your energy in some way, whether it be through inflation or something else, because you're paying for it, and it's not consensual. Like, it's just there because they said so, not because you actually requested it or because anyone actually wanted it. And this is how you can describe so many of the different government services that we get now. Is these are just things that are because they said so. You have no choice. You have to do it. You have to pay your taxes, and all this stuff is just forced on people, even though they don't think of it as being forced, just because they were born into it. But it's like no one asked, hey, do you want to pay taxes to go like send another bazillion bombs over the Middle East? I don't really want to do that, but it doesn't matter. We're doing it anyway. And
it's sad also like how much people, like being here in the heart of the liberal Bay Area, I find it truly alarming and terrifying how much people are like, how dare evil Elon Musk cut all of the funding to USAID? And it's like, well, look, so like, do you think we shouldn't pay taxes? And they're like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't pay taxes. And I'm like, fuck yeah, like get on board. Like, let's not pay any more taxes. And like, we don't have to worry about wars or anything else. And they're like, hang on, is that really what we want? And I'm like, yeah, it is.
Beautiful.
But I just find it, it's really sad to me, because I don't think people really actually understand that, like, this world where we're like not paying taxes and people are self-sovereign and that we have a smaller government, like this isn't some like insane shit show where like people are just getting shot and everything's on fire. Like, it's actually like a pretty utopian world that's like pretty great. Like the big things that like don't function really well anymore is that like the war machine can't finance itself. And so like, and again, like we can totally have war, but it's stuff that like there has to actually be like real purview over it. Like, you know, the House of Representatives actually has to like vote to finance the war. And that like we actually tether the government back to like some meaningful responsibility towards like its actual ethical creation of that. Like we have purview over this limited amount of money that like we get from our citizens because like they willingly paid that as a tax so they could get their roads and other bullshit. Right now, like that's just a completely unhinged, irresponsible process. And I think that's why, and again, I find it crazy that like I don't find what Elon Musk is doing is political. Like it, to me, like this, like if you have a business, you like audit it and you go, whoa, like it turns out like we don't need to buy 30,000 reams of paper. In fact, like we only need 3 reams of paper. Like let's send the others back. Like, whew, we like save some money. Isn't that great? But like somehow this is political now, and it's pretty wacky to me because it's like I thought we wanted our government to actually work in a meaningful way, but I don't know. Everything gets politicized in the day and age that we live in now. So it's pretty sad.
Yeah, totally. And I like that you brought up a couple of times how, like you, I grew up in a very left area. I was up in Seattle in that area, and you know, people very much grew up in a very far left household. All the friends, all the university students I was around, like everyone around me is on the left, and I have a very soft place in my heart for all of these people because I think that they really do want to do what's best for themselves in the future, just like the right does. I think that people are good and they want to create a better future, but you and I both would probably agree that there are a few pieces that they are missing or just have been, you know, coerced by the government forces to believe when it's not really true, that have sort of gotten them off track. And I would love to hear your take on what do you think are the main things that the people, we'll stick with the left here, the people on the left, what do you think are the main things that they're missing in where they are angling their energy and passion and why they should care more about Bitcoin?
Economic theory, like on a whole, from top to bottom, like they have zero meaningful understanding of economics, which is why they identify as a socialist. And I remember I had this conversation with some good friends that, you know, are from up in the Pacific Northwest. And it was the last conversation we had because of how bad it went. And I realized that like why they have such strong socialist perspectives is because like they will always be poor. Like there will never be an opportunity in their lives to provide for a greater amount of economic value where like they could actually become millionaires. And so for them, it's really easy for them to be like, yeah, we just like steal money from the millionaires, we redistribute it to the poor people, and like everybody's happy. And they don't sincerely get that, like, first of all, like stealing is like an unethical thing. So like, why does it suddenly become ethical at like a certain price point? But second of all, like, do you not understand that when you steal a lot of money from people that are wealthy, they will choose to send their operations elsewhere because like that's the kind of person they are, is like they think about money and savings and they go, well, if I just move my business operations 100 miles east, like I end up saving 10%. That's like a pretty worthwhile thing to me because like for me, that's $500,000. 10% for you is like $5. I can see why that wouldn't matter much to you. And so like, I think economic theory is extremely important because the other one is that the idea of modern monetary theory and that like the government's going to spend the money for good stuff and it's important that they spend it on that good stuff is like a real bullshitty thing that they believe. And so for me, the one I always return to is like, and this is why I don't identify as right or left. Like I've always been radically anti-war. Like I'm completely fucking uninterested in murdering anybody for any reason outside of my own need. Like, and people always find this intriguing. They're like, well, why do you love guns so much? And I'm like, there is such a categorical difference between me choosing to use a firearm against somebody who's threatening me or my family versus me choosing to bring violence to people who I've never met, I don't have personal conflict with, who other people have told me I'm supposed to have conflict with. Like these things are categorically different. And if you don't understand that relationship, like you haven't actually thought in this way in any meaningful way. And so for me, people on the left, I go, look, like is war something that's of value to you and that you believe in? You almost always get no. And you go, so why do you support a system that inherently allows for the government to create weapons of mass destruction that are used against people in ways that you have zero say whatsoever in? And that usually throws them for a loop where they have to go, huh, yeah, let me think about that. And I usually never get kind of a good response to it. So for me, it's really about the economic equation first, because it's once you can start to go, oh, okay, it turns out that like money is a thing actually of subjective value. And the other one I think is more important is like realizing like you can be an empowered economic agent. Like you can go create and sell and do whatever you want. And with Bitcoin, it's so much easier and so much more fluid. And also like if you want to sell illegal stuff, like go ahead. That's great. Like if like you want to sell stuff you gather in the forest and you don't want a permit, awesome. Use Bitcoin. Go on Nostr. Sell the stuff. You know, and I find most people are still unreceptive to it, but I at least feel for myself that's one of the strongest presentations I can kind of give to them for why they should care about understanding not only why Bitcoin works, but more importantly, economics. And like, I think until that is accepted, it's pretty difficult.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm glad you brought up the defunding war topic, because this is one I am always trying to explain to people. And in Saifedean's book, The Bitcoin Standard, he talks about this, and I have the page screenshot to actually send to friends when they ask, like, you know, how could you connect Bitcoin to war? Like you must be crazy if you think Bitcoin is going to stop the wars of the world. You've been drinking too much Kool-Aid. But I mean, it's when you look at the old times, when you have two kingdoms with the kings that don't like each other, you have a big pot of gold, and in order to conduct war, they pay their soldiers in gold to go fight. And as soon as one of the sides is out of gold, they can no longer pay their soldiers. The soldiers say, fuck this, I'm going home, and they stop fighting. The team that still has gold wins. War is over. Now, contrast that with today, where every single government has a money printer where they can just keep printing unlimited money and stealing from their population without them even knowing it through inflation. And so it basically gives these warmongering nations, of which the U.S. is definitely a massive one. It's probably the biggest. We have a responsibility as Americans to really call this out and say our government is just off the rails right now with all this funding of war everywhere. And
Well,
we
and like
need to
it's the
stop.
most anti-American thing that there can be done. Is like we actually stand for the values of freedom, the ability for people to have free speech, to be able to live in peace, to be in harmony with each other. And when we're allowing our governments to go fucking roguely murder whoever they want to because they don't align with whatever the political agenda is, like that's just an inherently despicable and un-American thing. And so like I find it really ludicrous that somehow these people have hijacked the dialogue of that, like supporting whatever war it is American, because it's not. Like it's the most un-American thing that there is. And to me, like that's one of the biggest things that really upsets me is like, and that's, you know, my number one goal with Bitcoin is like, I don't want global wars anymore. If things can reduce themselves to local conflicts and violence in that area, to me, like that's a much bigger win to have by being able to actually have the money limit what can be done. And it's also important to understand that like the very product of fiat money came about for war financing. Like the King of England literally couldn't finance his war, and his finance minister was like, check it out, we'll like make this bond thing and we'll like promise to pay everybody back after we've won the war. So like we'll issue these bonds, we'll collect a shitload of gold, we'll defeat the French, and then we'll use the new revenue from the imperialist project in France to like pay back the taxes. And they're like, yeah, that's like a good idea. And, you know, here we fucking are now.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the type of history lessons that we don't get taught in school, because they basically show you that the real problem is always coming down to the money. And the same ones controlling that money spigot are the ones that create the educational programs. And this is why we go through these school. And I still remember going through my economics classes in college, where, of course, they didn't mention Bitcoin. They didn't talk about why gold was good. They just talk about how the Federal Reserve and the banks are important because they, quote unquote, smooth out the booms and bust cycles, and they help make sure that we have like a stable 2% inflation, and just all these rules where you aren't even really taught to question, like, why do we have any inflation? Like, is any inflation
Yeah.
good for us? Do you think inflation is good for us, Eric? Tell me about inflation.
Well, it's interesting because the 2% thing is the best example, is because like this number's pulled out of an ass. Like there's nowhere in economic literature other than saying like we have an estimation that we think that this is the ideal thing, but like it starts to come down to all this sort of metacognition of like, well, what is education? Like, why are we here trying to learn about this? Like it seems to me kind of on its face that like if I'm trying to save something, that like those savings should be safe and should like acquire greater purchasing power over time. Like why doesn't the economy function that way? And it turns out when you like start to read in the history on your own and see what the true like historicity of the world is, like it turns out that, you know, and this is why I keep going back to the propaganda thing, is like I very strongly believe that like there's nothing that you can watch on TV and there's no education institute that you can go to that isn't inherently a propaganda based system. And like it's not to say that they can't deliver actual factual news, but like those facts, if you will, are always going to be prismed through a particular system that's going to empower them, you know. And I think as Daniel Webster once said, you know, like they don't seek to be your masters, but like they do seek to be a master first. And like that's the biggest thing, is like the system only works with them having power and mastery over it first. And this is the problem with how these systems operate inherently, is like unless you are truly self-sovereign, whether it's around money, education, or anything else, which demands a self-responsibility, you are always going to be subservient to someone in some way. And when those relationships are pushed into their extremes, that subservience is always going to mean like you are sacrificable within that paradigm. And so like I think that's really important, because like what I love about Bitcoin is that like I feel very strongly everyone should have some small amount, maybe not even a small amount, but they should have some amount of Bitcoin that they can access at any point in time. Because like, you know, one of the scarier examples that comes up is like, look, if you're like a married man and your wife suddenly freaks out because she thinks you're cheating on you and starts making accusations of all kinds of things against you, or let's just say, you know, you're out in the world and somebody accuses you of like a really heinous and despicable crime. Like you can be jailed, you can be cut off from your bank accounts, like all sorts of things can be done to deprive you of your economic liberty. But if you have a way to safely access some amount of Bitcoin for yourself, like that can be the difference between you being able to bail yourself out of a situation or flee the country if necessary, or whether or not like you end up in a cage for the rest of your life. And that's something really important to think about and consider for yourself, is you know, and same thing like, you know, for women that are in relationships where, you know, maybe they have a partner that's highly controlling for some reason, like you might want to consider having a nest egg of Bitcoin set aside somewhere in case like things ever get bad and you do need to flee. And like this is the last thing any of us wants, but it's really important to understand that like there are these really alarming and terrible situations that can produce themselves, where if you haven't taken the self-responsibility to consider that that is a non-zero chance and to prepare for it, you might find yourself in a pretty bad situation that you can't extract yourself from.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that this is a good transition into the book that you wrote, and the title of it is called Cryptosovereignty. And I think you pretty much just gave a great case for that. Like, it's giving you this level of sovereignty that just gives you that mental freedom and safety, and knowing that you have something that can't be taken away from you. Even like people can even take your life, but they couldn't even take your Bitcoin because they wouldn't be able to guess your password because it's like so encrypted. Now, just for your book, I'd love to get just the cliff notes of that. I unfortunately haven't been able to read it yet. I'd love to at some point. Could you give us just like an overview of what the crypto sovereignty thesis is that you shared in that book as a preview? And I'll make sure to have a link to it in the show notes so people can check it out.
The honest truth is I can't really give it a synopsis, because it's like 21 different essays that were all written separately that were never designed to really marry up into a book. But I guess the overarching thing is really kind of considering philosophically, like what sort of sovereignty does cryptography entail? How and why is Bitcoin different from crypto on a whole, and what the important features of that are? And what are the real possibilities that open up through a world where people start utilizing cryptography with an understanding that there's a very real form of power that gets produced when I choose to encrypt my information, and nobody can force me to unveil that, and the sort of systems of power that get produced through that, And I have one essay in there called Crypto, Truth, and Power, which really highlights, like, we need to understand that cryptography really is a technique of war at the end of the day. And so, like, that means that the choice to encrypt something and have total sovereignty over whether that information gets exposed or not truly is a new form of power. And from that, there can be a production of a totally new form of internet that is based and built on top of decentralized peer-to-peer asymmetric cryptography, which I ultimately believe, like, that is the political destiny of the future of that. Like, the internet is very, very broken right now with the sort of client server model that we're using, and the fact that, like, you have to go to Twitter or Facebook or whoever and go, hey, please, I've given you my login and password. Can I have access to all of my data? And they go, yes, you may. But as soon as you say something they don't like, they go, no, you can't have access to that anymore. And, like, that's not a future anybody wants. A future that people want is that, like, I own all my own data. You can't use my data against me. You can't sell it to advertisers. And with where we're going with AI, like, the entirety of the internet and this database model is fundamentally broken. And so, like, I think in the transition that we're going to go through into the future, people are essentially going to realize stuff like Bitcoin and Nostr is going to be the substrate that allows for us to build this new decentralized peer-to-peer asymmetric cryptographic protocol blob internet thing that will replace everything. And it's really exciting because there's also going to be the greatest of economic opportunities in participating in that and making that transformation with everyone.
What kind of economic opportunities do you see there specifically? Because I know that since you brought up AI, that's sort of something a lot of people are thinking when they hear AI is like, oh, it's going to steal my job. It's going to take my job. So, like, people are sort of scared of it. Like, they're going to lose economic opportunity because of these innovations. And so what would be your answer to that, and how Bitcoin and Nostr actually will make the future even better with AI versus a fiat plus AI future would probably be the worst possible outcome? How do you look at those two different paths?
Yeah, like, if you're not a highly skilled or creative individual, yeah, like, there are probably things for you to be worried about. But like, if you're talented and creative at whatever you do, AI is just going to enhance what you do in a really powerful way. And so, like, it's almost a forcing function to make people step into their uniqueness. Because, like, if you don't have a uniqueness to put out there, it's going to make things really hard. But if you do have uniqueness or talent really in anywhere, it's going to enhance what you do tenfold. And so, like, I really see most economic actors that are within the top 10% of whatever field they're doing, they're going to become 10 times more efficient and take all of the market from everybody else. And everybody else is going to have an opportunity to go engage much more deeply in their own niche and what they really should be doing. And I think, like, that's actually a really powerful and important and great thing, because in that, more wealth is going to get created across the board for everybody. And so I think people that create the tooling that is going to help make this transition are it, like, essentially every single model that exists on the internet today can essentially be ripped out and inverted, and, like, you essentially shove a bunch of, like, Bitcoin and Nostr stuff into that, and it becomes like a new free and open source self-reliant model that, like, on that model you can skim some part of payments off of it, and people will want to use it because it's 10 times better than the contemporary model. And also because it's free and open source, it means anybody anywhere can use it. There aren't rails on how these things are going to be controlled. And I think because of that, that increases the breadth of opportunity that, I really think, like, this is what wealth generation is. And that, like, a lot of people really neglect the fact that economics is not a zero-sum game. And, like, this is what wealth creation is about there's a new field that's available to create in. And so, like, with, there's tons of super talented musicians out there who make incredible music, but because trying to break into the music industry as it is today, there's all kinds of shit and barriers that make it nearly impossible. But if you get somebody talented on Nostr and have them do their thing, and they get 50, 100 dedicated followers, and each one's like, man, this fucking rocks, I'm going to zap this guy with $10. Suddenly, they actually have a pretty efficient model that's working, 10, if not 100 times better than all the contemporary ones. You're reaching out to your users directly, and nobody can take those performances from you. And so I think those kind of efficiencies are really going to drive the new future that we're going to go into, and it's going to provide so much more opportunity for everybody. And I think while it's really scary and it demands that people get outside of the boxes that they believe they're supposed to live within, like the box is broken and it's on fire. So like you have to get out of it anyways. And the quicker you do that, the more powerful you'll be in this new world.
I love that. And I'm glad that you brought up the musicians and the artists and how they can use these technologies to improve their output and be able to do what they love and make money doing it. I know this is something both of us care about because we were talking about before we even pressed the record button. And, after all the darkness that we talked about before, which is always in the mind, how we have this crazy war machine to defund and the state is just running amok and we need to defund this giant beast that's causing misery to everybody. At the same time, we have this beautiful future, like Bitcoin and Nostr's ability to create very positive outcomes right now for good people creating great things who are actually bringing value to the world rather than destroying it. So I'd love to just dig more into that. You just gave a really good overview right there, basically, of why artists should care about this. But what would be your elevator pitch for why people who do have something interesting to create and have some uniqueness, like you said, as I think a lot of people out there could really stop and think about it and say, you know what, I do make some pretty cool shit. Like I want to be rewarded for this, and I want to take advantage of Bitcoin and Nostr to be able to do that. What would you tell them?
I'd say first, just like focus on your art, like for me as like a writer and a podcast guy, for me, this was always a production for myself. Like I always just wanted to answer these questions and get it out. So it's like, first and foremost, just concentrate on like whatever your art is. But furthermore, through you just owning that and putting it out there, you're going to find a lot greater traction in using something like Nostr where you own all of your own content and information, and you're going to reach out to kind of other people that are interested in it. And, like the other one is like the future before us is so bright, and I find it I 100% get the darkness. But what I really see is that like there's such a massive opportunity right now that like I very much believe that our generation, the one that has like we straddle the world between knowing what a world looks like without the internet and with it, and having grown up without it and having it today makes us a very unique and empowered population that I think like it comes down to us on whether or not we get a pretty technologically utopian looking world or we get a technologically dystopian panoptic surveillance future. And like that's up to us. And to me, it's already very clear, like good is going to win because like that's how the narrative plays out. And like that's something to be really excited about and to celebrate and to enjoy. And the more that you meet other Bitcoiners and you connect on that topic, it becomes very real. And that's kind of one of the things that I really love talking about people with is really presencing them to like Bitcoin is actually the goodness that we believe it to be, and that purity and engaging with it and building on it for what it is, like that's a great thing that we should feel good about and that we should celebrate. And also just funny that that's also like the highest best use and like the most attractive thing that we can do in our lives. Like it becomes a kind of magnetism that pulls other people in, and they go, whoa, like these Bitcoiner people seem really happy and excited about what they're doing. Like, I'm curious to know more. Like, how can I participate in this? And like that's one of the things I love the most about going to Bitcoin conferences. Just like the vibration and frequency of what's going on is so high. And because like there is a real mutual acknowledgement of like, hey, like we all want to fix the money. We all get that it's fucking broken, and we all get that by us fixing the money, there's greater opportunity for all of us. And like, that's a good thing that we should feel proud of, and that we should be really impressed and happy with each other. And even more importantly than that, like I'm always blown away just at the caliber, quality, and generosity of people that I encounter in the Bitcoin field, because everybody actually gets that this is an important mission that could realistically change things in a really important way. And that's important to remember as we all kind of go through this journey together.
Couldn't agree more. And I love how there's so many paths that we sort of just laid out there for people to take to just get more into this thing. If you're a creator who wants to keep creating content and get paid for it, Nostr is right there. But even if you're not like a quote unquote creator or an artist, no matter what your craft is that you're passionate about, you can just start using your earnings for that to save in Bitcoin. And if you have knowledge or specific skills that could be useful for other people to teach, post that knowledge onto Nostr and you can earn even more Bitcoin. So there's really just so many ways to get into this thing. Go to your local Bitcoin meetup, go to the conferences nearby. They're all over the place now. Pretty much every major city has them. If it doesn't, start one. Find some people that are into it. There are places like Orange Pill app and Satlantis, which are these different places where you can go find like meetups that are going on and connect with other Bitcoiners in these areas. So really just want to encourage everyone out there to continue going into this rabbit hole with us and learning all these awesome opportunities that lay ahead in the Bitcoin future. So I think that'd be a pretty good place to start wrapping it up, Erik. There's so many notes I have for future episodes. I think we could cut that off since it's on a high note, and we'll come back to it another time with more topics. So where can people follow you to continue looking into your work?
The best place is if you can find me on Nostr, follow me there. I'm also on X. It's just at Erik Cason. And, my book is called Cryptosovereignty. You can buy that in the Bitcoin bookstore. You can find it on Amazon too. I just really encourage people that like whatever you have to contribute is meaningful and important, and just keep continuing and pursuing your own journey, and at each step there's going to be difficulties, but now there's this really robust community of Bitcoiners who truly want to help others. And so like at any point that you're feeling stuck, and most importantly was like, if you're kind of new on your journey and you haven't like met other Bitcoiners like out in the wild, like you should go to a meetup or to a conference or something. Cause like meeting other Bitcoiners in the wild is like a really cool experience that you realize, that like there's this whole ethos that people want to participate in. So I would really encourage anybody who's thinking that to do that.
100%. Everyone get out there and get on it. Bitcoin's happening, whether you like it or not. Time to get on the train, getting happier, getting more stacks raised higher, and just being ready for the future and being more free. So exciting time to be alive for sure. Erik, thank you so much for joining me today, man. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Ben. It was a great conversation, and I appreciate being here too.